Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about the functions within Python language. Functions are primarily uh, a block of code that we could use for reusability purposes. Like you create a function, this function can be called multiple times. And why we use functions is because if it has been called multiple times, you don't have to go and change at all the places. Rather, you change a function and it is reflected across all the places where the function is invoked. So it's more like making your code modular and then it could be reused. The second advantage of the function is we could pass on parameters or arguments. Within Python language, the parameters and arguments are a little bit different, and we'll see within the practical how exactly those parameters and arguments would differ and how fundamentally they differ from the traditional languages like C or C++ or Java or something like that. And a function typically would return a value. Of course, normally if you come from a very traditional languages, there is a function and there is a procedure. A procedure is normally a kind of a function, a reusable code that does not return some value, but functions typically return a value. But in our case, in Python especially, you can have a function that either returns a value or doesn't return a value. So there's no separate two kinds of stuff out here, but rather there's only one function. If it returns a value, that's fine. That's a special use case you are trying to solve. And if it doesn't return a value, that's another kind of a use case your function could do. So without wasting much of the time, I think so that's where the functions could be used within Python. And let's see how we could actually utilize these functions, understand the difference between parameters and arguments, and also understand how those functions can return the value. So let's see, friends, how we could use these functions within Python. In order to define a function, I'll just use a def keyword, and let's say I'll define a function with a colon sign over here. And let's say I'll use a print, for example, hello from Python language, something like this. So now this is a very simple function. That's all. Let's try to execute that. If I just execute this file, I have not called that function, so this is a definition. Now in order to invoke that function, I just need to call that function called as test. So I'm actually invoking that function. If I try to run it, so hello from Python language. Now this is a very simple example of a function, and mind it, when you actually write a function like this, so you have to use a full colon out here, and this line does, this space does is like matters a lot in Python language. Normally these spaces are treated in different way in C# or other, where you just try to kind of format your code or stuff in a way, but in Python especially, these spaces have a special meaning. So don't change those spaces or anything. And if you want to like print out some other lines, so you could print out that way. Let's say we'll create another function. So let's say test, and I'll pass on a let's say name. Now this is a parameter which I'm passing, and I'll say we are calling function and receiving value, let's say. Now this value, I'll just want to name it as, let's say, name, right? And then I'll call that function, let's say test1. This is a test1 function. And now because the test1 function receives one value, so let's say I'll pass on my name, which is Rohit. And if I want to call this one, so you call the run the function again, so you could see the value, whatever is being passed out here, it's automatically done. Now let's say the another function which we want to create, where we want to kind of return some value also. So let's say I just want to create a function add, and let's say I want to function pass on a comma b, and then I'll simply say let's say return a plus b. So I want to add on two values and then finally return it back, right? So that's only a return. It's an expression which I'm returning. So I receive two values and I return it. Now in order to call this function, so I'll simply say add, and I'll say 10 comma 20. Now when I pass this on, so 10 and 20, they are received by a and b respectively. So you just add those values and get it back. So if you try to run this program, because we didn't actually receive the value, so I'll simply say result is equal to this add, and then I'll simply say result. If I do that and I'll try it out, so you could see the 30 is the value which I have received, and that's how it works. So that's how those are the like a function, you define it, you call a function, you have a, let's say, a parameter being passed out. You could supply that parameter, or even you could have a return value within a function that could you could actually use it to kind of manipulate and return some expression, might be a multiplication or anything, whatever the processing does, and get it back to the calling place. So we can also create functions where the number of arguments that you are passing are not very much clear. When they are not clear, you pass those arguments, and the function can behave in a way it can receive number of arguments, not defining all those arguments as comma separated, rather using those arguments in the form of a asterisk sign. So let's say I'll define a function test2 and I'll say it is gonna receive cities, right? And I'll use that and I'll say print the value of city is, and I'll pass on cities of, let's say, 0, right? Now when I pass it on, so let's see how we could call this function, because the asterisk sign over here with cities means number of arguments. We are not clear. This may be 2, 4, 5 or anything. So whatever is being passed, then it could be accessed in the form of a tuple, right? So if I call that function test2, let's say, and then I'll simply pass on, for example, Vancouver, and I'll pass on Toronto. So these are the two arguments which I pass on. And if I call this function, let's say, and it just simply says the value of city is Vancouver. Why? Because we are getting the index of 0. Now if I change the index and I get it to 1, so this would be more likely I would get it in the form of a Toronto, right? Because that's the second value. So it treats these arguments as tuples. And you would also see or encounter in Python where you would have 2 asterisk signs rather than 1. They are called as Kwargs, or whatever you want to call it. So that's typically the arguments are received in the form of a dictionary, means in the form of an object. So let's try to use that way also. So let's say test3, and I'll just use an object, for example, employee. When you receive that, and I want to print the name of the employee is, and you could just fundamentally say emp of, let's say, first f name, right? So that's what we are trying to do. Now when we are trying to call this one, for example, so I can just simply say test3, and I can pass on, for example, my first key is equal to f name is Rohit, and then I can pass on, let's say, last name is equal to Dhand, right? So that's what I'm passing. But this is a form of a key I'm sorry, key and value pair. So I'm passing on key f name, last name, and then these are the values which are being received. So the 2 asterisk signs could actually receive this, and I could just use the key name to actually retrieve that value. Now if I try to run this function, and the name of the employee is, so you say Rohit, because that's the first name which we are receiving it. So I hope, guys, this kind of makes clear to you what functions are, how they could be used in Python, how we pass a function, create a function, call a function, pass arguments, pass parameters, and even pass Kwargs, like 1 asterisk sign or multiple asterisk double asterisk sign, to actually use it in the form of a tuple or use it in the form of a dictionary. So we'll be coming up with dictionaries and tuples in the next lectures, but that's how I think so it gives you a clear-cut idea of how we can define those functions within Python. So I'll be coming back with more videos, guys, and I hope you like this video. Your learning journey continues. If you have any special suggestions or anything, please comment on my video. Happy to hear your feedback, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.